station where unknown forces strike the edge of ecology.
Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. I was expecting to have a nice walkway, but this is nice. Coziness is nice. I have an American accent. I lived in America for 23 years of my life. I've lived here for 23 years of my life. And this is my spiritual home, so absolutely love London. So, yes, I want to talk about what I feel is one of the biggest conspiracies, which is that of the suppression of multidimensional reality, who and what we really are. And I want to do that through sharing my personal experiences. This isn't me reading a bunch of books. This is me being raw and telling you exactly what I've personally experienced through either hitchhiking and having very bizarre, experiences. Doing synchronicity walks, which Andy mentioned, which I mostly do in London, but I'm happy to do anywhere I'm invited to give one. And obviously I do a lot of exploration using other development tools like remote viewing, lucid dreaming, out-of-body exploration. And of recent, my company has developed a deep trance light machine where I was inspired through a near-death experience from a friend of ours. And the device is basically, it's a high-powered machine which has 12 LED lights. You close your eyes when you sit down in front of the light, and once it begins to flicker, basically at a pre-programmed frequency, and immediately in your mind's eye, you start to see psychedelic colors and imagery, geometric patterns, mandalas, and it's a very striking experience. Most people, we run our introduction session with people when we go to fairs and festivals or talks like this. I wish we would have brought one, which are about 4 minutes in length, but it's the reason we designed such a short session is to show you how powerful technology can be to help people experience something that maybe they've never ever experienced in their entire life, such as an altered state of consciousness, which we can typically get people into a trance state in seconds with this machine. So it's a very powerful device. Basically, it works by you closing your eyes, and the light starts to flicker, and it goes through the eyelids, starts to excite the retinas of the eyes, goes to the visual pathway between the eyes and the brain, which is the optic nerve to the thalamus, and then it sends signals to other parts of the brain, such as the visual cortex, the pineal gland, prefrontal lobe, etc. We can pretty much, between that and some sound, we can entrain the entire brain. So we use it for purposes of simple things like stress management, anxiety management, depression management, which aren't very simple at all because the medical community gets a lot of it wrong. We use the light for doing brain sort of enhancement, so cognitive enhancement. We can get to very profound states of consciousness like gamma frequencies. The average person will experience spikes of gamma throughout the day, which is a very fast brainwave state. Our sort of base operating consciousness during the day is theta, which is between 30, 38 hertz, depending on what you believe. And that's analytical consciousness mainly. But with this light, we can move you up into gamma, hypergamma, which is 100 hertz and above. That basically means your brain is firing more than 100 times per second, front and back chemically. And we can go all the way up to over 200 hertz with the machine, which is lambda, which is currently the highest recorded brainwave state. And with that full range, going all the way down, including alpha, theta, delta, and epsilon, we cover the whole range of human consciousness. And with that, we can even use the light for exotic states of consciousness, such as inducing lucid dream states and out-of-body experiences. So it's a very powerful machine. Saying that, has anybody here used one of the devices that I'm talking about? Yes, you did indeed. So I like to explore in different ways, and I like to do it through direct experience. So if you teach me something, I'm going to go as far as I can with it, and I'm going to learn as much as I can with that tool, and then integrate it with other tools. One of my favorite ways to teach is through the direct experience route and things like the synchronicity walks. So what I would typically do, I'll sort of print off some notices, and I'll go into London, I'll go to spiritual bookshops, alternative cafes, and I'll post a sign which will basically say something simple like a synchronicity walk. And maybe I'll just post a little bit of information such as take a walk across London with your intuition as your guide. And then there'll be some simple bullet points, experience, be in the right place at the right time, to experience the miraculous, magic around every corner, be in the right place at the right time to experience, to meet with strangers, of significance. And I usually post a time, a date, and a place. And that's usually enough to generate the interest from at least 30 to 40 people who don't know me. And they show up and they typically ask the same thing, what's the plan? And they very quickly learn that there is no plan. So I pull dice out of my pocket and I say we basically follow the dice the whole night. So when we get to a street corner where there's an intersection, we always use the dice. And the idea is to take all conscious control out of choosing direction. Because I find the more that we can get out of the way, the more experiences we can have of reality proper. And what I mean by that is we have our belief systems, and our belief systems can really blind us into experience reality in a way that we become very conditioned and used to because of our preferences, our very strong assumptions, and our expectations of reality, how it should work, how it shouldn't work. So the synchronicities are really great because with this very basic idea of just rolling the dice to get out of the way of control and let intuition guide us, we have a lot of magic. And for example, on a typical walk, what I'm about to relate is pretty typical of every single walk. By any chance anybody here done a synchronicity walk with me? Wow, okay, yeah. My partner. So when people show up and we go through the very basic guidelines, I would say to them, we'll roll the dice at every street corner. It helps to at least be open to experiencing the phenomena of synchronicity. And a couple other things such as, follow your instincts and follow your first instinct. So if somebody would say, okay, we're walking along and suddenly they feel a strong pull to go into an alleyway, then just say something to the group and we'll follow their intuition into the alleyway. And sometimes there's just things to explore there that you may not think are there. So on one particular walk, we rolled the dice at the very beginning to get what's called a group number. Because I think the universe likes to communicate with us through numbers, as a lot of us who study these things will find. Especially when we start to see the convergence of numbers. If we see the same number several times, and to me it's usually a sign to pay attention. So we roll the dice at the very beginning to get our group walk, and we look out for that walk. If it starts to come up in clusters, like say for example, the moment we roll the dice, and say it's the number 4, like it happened on one night, and number 4 bus goes by us, we'd immediately follow in that direction. That's a very synchronized experience. So on one occasion, that's pretty much what happened. We got the number 4 at the beginning of the walk. We started following the signs. And we got about 15 minutes into the walk when we came to a bus stop, which was the number 4 bus. And we already knew the significance, okay, our group number is number 4, but we rolled the dice again, and number 4 came up again. So I said to people, okay, that's pretty synchronized, so why don't we, when the number 4 bus comes, we all get on the bus. And some people are getting a bit nervous, thinking, I wonder if I have enough on my Oyster card. I don't know if I really want to follow this guy onto a bus. And just roll the dice. I've parked my bike over there. All those sort of preferences and worries and stuff that come up. The moment I said we should get on the bus and the bus comes, the bus literally came around the corner. So it didn't give people much time to think. But again, it was just highly synchronized. And to me, it's one of those things where I've learned to be very intimate with this state of consciousness and trust that guidance. Because I find that we can also have another aspect to synchronicity, which is the trickster aspect. So if we follow the guidance, where even if for some people they're taking themselves too seriously, I think that trickster aspect of synchronicity is always there to remind us not to take ourselves too serious and to laugh. So the bus stopped, and I said, okay, let's get on it. So everybody got on the bus. The moment we got on the bus, it began to pour down with rain. And literally the moment we all got on the bus, it began to rain. So again, really good synchronicity. And again, we trusted to follow the guidance. And I was just thinking once we sat down that if we wouldn't have trusted it, we would have encountered that trickster aspect of synchronicity. It would have reminded us to take ourselves not too serious next time because now we're all wet. So that was nice. We were dry. So once we got on the bus, I decided, why don't we roll the dice again to see how many stops we go? Literally to take every aspect of control out of the way. So I rolled the dice and we got the number 9. And we went 9 stops. I remember getting to the 9th stop, and we're all getting off the bus. And I promise you, it stopped raining the moment we got off the bus. So again, it was just perfectly synchronized. And then when we all got off the bus, we looked at there was a sign on the wall, literally exiting the bus, that said, wait here for further instructions. What? So by that, everybody's jaw was literally open, and it was one of those moments where I think doubt was very much starting to ebb away from people. That maybe there really was something to this, that if we did sort of relinquish that control, get into that state of, just going with the flow, we can experience reality within realities. So we waited by the sign as instructed. And within literally just a minute, this black cab pulled up, and his passenger got out, and he literally looked over at us. And the moment we looked over, we instinctively, everybody sort of moved out of the way, like the parting of the Red Seas, and he could read this sign. And he just sort of chuckled. And so I said to him, I said, look, we're not tourists. We don't want to go to Buckingham Palace. We're sort of just wandering across London randomly. And I said, would you mind just, without even thinking about it, just choose a direction for us, and we'll follow that direction. And he did, without even thinking about it. He just sort of suddenly pointed. And so we followed, his guidance, and we continued. Within less than 5 minutes, we came to a point in London where there was a residential block of flats. And there was some real heavy music coming, loud music coming from upstairs at the top floor flat. And I said to everybody, I think we've got good guidance, wait there for further instructions. The cab driver sent us this way. We've got this loud music which seems to be calling to us. Why don't we go upstairs and gate crash the party? And again, some people were like, you can tell they're just not used to their boundaries being pushed so much. But if you're going to hang out with me, it's bound to happen. So the moment I suggested we go up, and you can see the nerves, again, we didn't have to wait too long for some validation. This guy came out of this pub across the road, and he sort of stopped, did a double take, and he was like, oh, hello there, what are you guys up to? Because there was about 20 of us. And I explained to him that we'd just been sent down this way, and we heard the music, and we thought we'd gate crash the party. He was like, no way, my mates just bet me I wouldn't do the same. And so again, it was perfectly synchronized. And I stopped the group really quickly, and I said to him, now look, really look into this. You're allowed to read into what's happening here at the moment, because, so far this has been a perfectly synchronized night because we haven't got in the way. We've allowed, to what's there. We're like the consciousness of water. We literally just flowed with what is. And went around things without force, went through things if necessary, but again, just going with that flow, and we wound up there. And I said, what if we waited another minute for the taxi driver to come? Would we have missed this guy? Or maybe that guy would have had his journey delayed just by another minute as well, through something, that would have done that. And I think, when we get to that level of seeing, to a degree, behind the scenes, to at least acknowledge there seems to be some force there that does offer us guidance, and usually very good guidance if we're willing to listen. So anyhow, we sort of found a way to buzz ourselves in by pushing a bunch of buttons, and somebody eventually let us in. And we trundled all the way up to the top floor flat, and we knocked on the door, and this guy, I promise you, it was just like an actor on a stage, coming in stage left. He opened it up with a reefer in his mouth. He's like, yeah. And I was like, explain. I said, look, we're just wandering around London, randomly going from place to place, rolling dice, and the dice brought us to your doorstep. And he was just, he sat there just for like a nanosecond thinking about that. And he was like, oh, come on in. And we just had this great night. So that's the kind of fun I like to have, in town in the old smoke. And I think this is the kind of thing where we can experience synchronicity around every corner. And it's just a matter, once again, it's not one of the things I think that we have to activate as such, or we have to behave in a certain way, or think in a certain way. I don't think synchronicity plays by mortal rules. I think this is something beyond belief systems. It's something beyond our fears and our expectations and preferences. So, and even regardless of what mood you're in. I mean, how many times have you heard expressions like, misery loves company? I've been in plenty of mood, and I've found other people to synchronize with similar moods, because like does seem to attract like. So when we go out on these walks, we have these sort of basic ideas in mind, and we do have a lot of fun and a lot of occurrences of back-to-back-to-back-to-back synchronicity. And I promise you, what I just relayed is pretty typical of most walks. They don't always, obviously don't happen the same way, but what does happen really opens people up like a cosmic can opener. And I think it reminds them that, there's an opportunity here, whether it's through meditation, whether it's through some other practice, whether it's remote viewing. Remote viewing is great in that sense, where at the beginning they do what they call their cool down, which is like a warm-up for an athlete. They literally start to relax into meditation, depending on, the individual, to get themselves in a certain place where the data will flow for them as an individual. And if you've read anything about some of the ex-military folks, some of them like heavy metal to cool down with, and I can understand that, because that if that's something that you really like and are passionate about, then that will help that individual. So tonight I want to talk about what I mentioned earlier, to me, what I think is the single biggest conspiracy, because I think all of them pretty much hinge on this. Because from my personal experience, although we're playing this role of being a human, this is not who we are. This is not, our origins. This is just a role that we're temporarily playing. Even if we play this role 1,000 times or 4,000 times, through reincarnation, this is still a temporary journey as human versus that non-human aspect of who and what we really are. So we don't have a big whiteboard, so we've got this, and I'm sorry about that, but this is supposed to be planet Earth here. And these sort of rings are just a very poor representation of multidimensional reality. But a diagram is a diagram, and we can only do so much with something like that when we're dealing with consciousness that is of a multidimensional nature. So I will do my absolute best to help you understand that this is not a model of reality as such. This is just a diagram. But I'm hoping through this diagram in my talk to give you an idea of at least what I'm exploring and other people like me. So for the past 12 years, I've been doing out-of-body exploration and astral projection. And I've got to a point where I've gotten good enough at it where I actually teach it to other people now. Also part of communities online, one online community in particular where we actually have not just other out-of-body explorers, but we have some physicists, we have some philosophers, we have some psychologists, and we are basically building a consensus map of non-physical reality. So it's about a team of 50 explorers from all different walks of life and different countries. Some of them are world-famous authors of this sort of genre. And we have a lot of fun exploring. We try not to take ourselves too seriously. And like I said, we're trying to build this picture of non-physical reality, because I think we've got an understanding of physical reality. We don't fully understand everything underneath the ocean. We have our different theories about things such as the moon, Mars, aliens, crop circles, flat Earth, dome theory, things like that. There's a lot of things that we can discuss tonight, and I'm very happy. I'm hoping to squeeze in enough time to have a Q&A session so I can answer whatever question you may have. If I have an answer, I'll honestly answer it through my own direct experience. If I don't have an answer, then I'll just be honest and tell you I don't have an answer. It's that simple. That's how I am. So about 12 years ago, after exploring remote viewing for a period of about 9 years, I decided it didn't seem to be giving me the access that I really wanted to behind the scenes. With most remote viewing practices, it's impression-based. You're getting a lot of impressions on the target. Whereas, sometimes I would experience something in a remote viewing state, which we would call bilocation, where it seemed we were more at the actual target site itself, and that always really excited me. It was a totally different feeling. And Joseph McMoneagle is probably the most famous remote viewers, ex-military U.S. Army, where he did a system called ERV, which is extended remote viewing. And I think it's very similar to what Edgar Casey would have done, very similar to what perhaps out-of-body explorers can experience with what's called a mental projection. A lot of out-of-body experiences based on what you hear on a classic out-of-body experience, where you feel some sort of vibrational energy. Maybe you hear your name, or you hear loud sounds. Maybe even something's tugging at one of your energy body limbs. It's basically it's an in-between state marker. It's a signpost that says you have now achieved an alternate sort of state. And with that, you can now do something more expanded. So you can expand that state of awareness. So in those sort of years of remote viewing, like I said, I just felt like I wanted to be able to go deeper. I wasn't getting behind this sort of physical veil as much as I wanted to, and I wanted to go much deeper, because I really was tired of sort of the ideas of science, the ideas given to us by religion, the ideas, all the belief systems at large throughout society, things that they want us to believe versus actually being able to have direct knowledge of through direct experience. So I picked up a book that I'd read many years prior when I was, I think, 17 years old. And it was a book by Robert Monroe. Anybody know of Robert Monroe? Good, quite a few of you. Robert Monroe is considered one of the modern pioneers in out-of-body exploration. He started having spontaneous experiences back in the 1950s. And during the 1970s, he finally wrote his first book, Journeys Beyond the Body, which has become an absolute classic. So if you haven't read it, I would definitely suggest his work. Monroe's deceased from this level now. So yeah, so about 12 years ago, I reread that book. And I looked into Monroe a little bit more, found out that there was the Monroe Institute in the US where they do what's called hemisync. Anybody familiar with hemisync technology? So hemisync technology is a sound-based sort of entrainment system where you use headphones and you'll have two distinct sounds, one in each ear, which will then create a differential that your brain will start to entrain to. And so I found out that they did a home study course because their residential course in the US, I was living here at the time, was very expensive compared to what I had at the time money-wise. And so I ordered their home study program, which was a series of 18 CDs. And I read a lot online about it, I researched quite a bit, and it seemed like a lot of people were getting some good out-of-body results from that. And I wanted to be able to experience that too. I thought this might give me the access that I'm ultimately looking for to go deeper down the rabbit hole. So it took about a week or so for the package to be delivered, and I remember the day it was delivered, and I sort of sat the package down and I just sat there looking at it for a few minutes because I was getting really excited thinking about when I was a child. Between the ages of 6 and 12, I had spontaneous out-of-body experiences at that time that my mother used to record for me in a journal. And I always knew it was different from dreams because when I was that age and I would have a dream experience, I would never see my bedroom and I would never see my physical body. And then this other type of experience, which I didn't know how to label at the time, which I now know to be an out-of-body experience, I would see my bedroom, and I would see my body, and I would always have this, sort of experience of energy that I could never quite put my finger on, that made me feel very queasy as a child when it happened. And that's the in-between state phenomenon of what we call the vibrational state. So it was just a marker, a signpost to let you know that you have achieved, that borderline state of consciousness between wakefulness and sleep, which is an ideal state to explore so many different methods, whether clairvoyance, remote viewing, you name it, you can explore it. So I got the program, I ripped into the box eventually, and I was a little bit disappointed at first to read the material about the 18 CDs, because I'm a very impetuous person. I just want to jump into things. And I noticed that the 3 CDs on out-of-body exploration were the last 3 in the set, so CDs 16, 17, and 18. And they were suggesting to use the program in sequential order because it builds one CD on the next, and that you should really take your time, maybe 2 or 3 months. And I was like, bollocks. So I remember being on the sofa the first night. It was probably about 10 o'clock at night. I put the headphones on. I heard Robert Monroe's voice start to describe what was going to happen. I got really excited, and I woke up about 4 o'clock in the morning after falling asleep and nothing happened. And the next day, I had the same result. I started the session about 10 p.m., fell asleep, woke up again with no memory of anything. So what I learned was that the technology itself is pretty powerful. It can create these altered states, and the altered state I was experiencing was unconscious sleep, because I had no discipline at that time. So after about a week of this happening, I got frustrated and thought, okay, you know what? I should first probably do some research on the best time of day to use this, because we have the circadian rhythm at certain times in the evening, we start getting flooded with a certain chemical, I think it's melatonin, that starts to induce, that state for sleep. And once I learned this stuff, I adjusted my time of when I was using the CDs. And then I also decided I'm going to really slow down. I'm going to take my time with this. Because one thing I have done for a lifetime is I've had to believe what everybody else tells me. Again, such as the church, state, religion, science, which is kind of like religion. And so I took my time with it. I started exploring around 8 o'clock in the evening, 7 o'clock in the evening, and I went the whole 2 or 3 months exploring all 18 CDs without having an out-of-body experience. But I did start to learn how to have the discipline of at least to have a single point focus, which was very important. And it was at that time I reevaluated the situation. I thought, you know what, I'm going to continue. In the past, I would have maybe given up at that point if I hadn't gotten some sort of result. But I did at least look at the sort of having that single point focus, which was good for meditation. I thought I do feel at least more relaxed and calm these days. So that is something in itself to value. And I decided I'm going to keep with this. And so I did. It was a year into the practice. I got really good at meditation, but still haven't had any out-of-body experiences. And believe me, I put a lot of energy into this, expecting to get a lot back out of it. And then came a date when I found a book online by a chap named William Bowman. And William Bowman, which is spelled B-U-H-L-M-A-N, wrote a fantastic book called Adventures Beyond the Body. And it was published, back in the 1990s. And so I read the book, and in the book, he starts talking about different techniques, and I realized, wait a second, this is what I'm probably missing. I'm treating the hemisync technology as a magic bullet, when ultimately it's designed to get you into the right state, but you can still get in the way. You can get in the way with unconscious fears and not even realize it. Or, without that single point focus, if your mind's all over the place drifting, you may not recognize the signs when they come that say, hey, you're now in an altered state. So reading William Buhlman's book, he had about 50 different, astral projection techniques, which he teaches. And coincided with that week, I remember go for a walk in my local area where there's some woods. And going into the woods, and I must have come into contact with the wrong sort of plant, and I had this rash come up a couple days later, like from poison ivy or poison oak. And it got so bad within about a week, I woke up about 4 a.m. one morning, and I thought to myself, it's so painful. And I was itching, and I put some lotion on, and decided to get the hemisync out, lie down on the sofa, use some of William Buhlman's techniques to see if I can at least induce a really deep trance state so I don't have to feel, the itching. So about an hour into the practice, I was very conscious, very aware, and then I must have dipped a little bit into unconsciousness. But it was probably the perfect storm that I created. Waking up with, sort of interrupting my sleep pattern, which is known to be able to induce an OB just itself. Jet lag can induce the state, or at least things like waking sleep paralysis, which can be a horrible thing if you don't know what it is. So suddenly I get these strong vibrations that brought me back to full waking consciousness, and I got really inwardly excited because I knew what those were. That's what Robert Monroe talked about in his book, William Buhlman talked about in his book, and everybody else online I researched were like, this is a signpost to say that you are on the borderline state and you can potentially have an out-of-body experience with that phenomenon present. So I got really excited. I had an eye mask on. I decided I was going to explore with an eye mask just in case things happened, like clairvoyance tuned in while I was doing my practice. If I could suddenly see through my closed eyelids, I would know something was happening. But I wanted to, again, really be able to validate it, so I used to wear an eye mask. So if I could see through my eyelids and an eye mask, I definitely knew something was happening. And on this occasion, when I'm experiencing the vibrations, lying on my sofa, I felt my body was in full paralysis. I couldn't move even if I wanted to. And then suddenly realized, wait a second, I can see the ceiling. And so I knew I was in one of those, deep states that was possible for now inducing the out-of-body state. So I used one of William Buhlman's techniques to exit the body. And within literally less than a second, I was sitting up at a right angle out of my physical body, which was lying on the sofa. I remember turning around and seeing my body there and thinking, wow, that's really cool. I waited a year for this. This is fantastic. And then I stood up away from my body. The moment I stood up, this white light started flooding into the lounge. And it was non-physical in nature. And then this hand sort of reaching through the light. And I was like, what the fuck is that? And it really, it kind of put the fear in me. And I suddenly jumped back into my body. And I remember then suddenly feeling the paralysis again, pitch black, so I knew I was behind the eye mask again, and all the clairvoyance was now gone because of the fear. And it was almost as if it was like a fear test, not to see if I was going to fail, but to see if I was really ready to do this. I didn't know, that was just what was going through my mind. And I thought, damn it, I'm going to lie still and I'm going to see if I can get those vibrations back. And you really think about that. Whenever you experience something, you now have the blueprint for it. So if you're in an elevator and suddenly it goes down in just the right way at a certain speed and you feel that, sort of energy in your tummy like butterflies, we've all probably experienced that, either whether in turbulence on a plane or an elevator on a swing. We know what it feels like. So if we sit and relax, we can feel into that energy, and we can usually through intention bring that energy about. So I thought, I'm going to lie still. And I realized I'm in paralysis still. I have no say over that. So I kept still in the paralysis. And I thought about the vibrations, and within just less than a couple of minutes, they came back, and they seemed to come back stronger than the first time. And again, I could start seeing through the eye mask, so I knew I was now in my energy body and no longer my awareness in my physical body. So again, I made the intent to sit up, and I did. But this time I was a bit more hesitant. I started looking around the room, scrutinizing for any emanations of light and disembodied hands. And there was nothing, so I stood up. But the moment I stood up again, the light came back and the hand came back. And remember, the hand was probably the distance from me to you, and it was sort of outstretched, and it looked friendly enough. So I thought to myself, come on, Todd. This day is, you've been building up for this day for an entire year. Just go for it, what lies beyond that hand? You know, it's multidimensional reality, for God's sake. Take the hand. And so I reached out, and I was really quite entranced. I had my energy body was the perfect duplicate of my physical body. And I remember reaching out my hand, and this other hand took hold of me and gently guided me away from my physical body. And it was a very profound experience. It was it wasn't my longest experience by far. It wasn't, the most experience-filled journey. It only lasted for a few minutes, but I promise you, it was enough when I woke back into my body to realize that, it had changed me. I now felt I had a key. I felt I was now, it was within my hands to explore beyond the body and hopefully physical reality. Because at the moment, that was just my lounge. And I came out of the experience, and I, the next day, decided I'm going to double and triple my efforts. I'm going to wake up every morning, interrupt my sleep after about 6 hours of sleep, and I'm just going to go for it. And I'm going to learn from what I experienced. And by the end of the first week, beginning of the next week, I'd induced 2 more conscious experiences. And by the end of the second week, I had another 5 out-of-body experiences. So that was about 8 experiences within the course of 2 weeks. It seemed as if I finally hit this energy, threshold. And I was then capable of almost at will to be able to have out-of-body experiences from that point onwards. I would say for the first 30 journeys or so out of my body, most of them were pretty much the same. They were all very sort of earthbound in the sense that we have physical reality, and then we have what we call and refer to as non-physical reality. But from the perspective of someone who lives in what we call a non-physical zone, their zone is very physical. And from their perspective, we seem to be non-physical in nature. So it really is a thing based on perspective. And physicality is something that is, ultimately, it's a state of consciousness. A lot of scientists are now coming to the conclusion that this is possibly a virtual reality. And if so, then is this base reality, or is this somebody else's, sort of reality that we're experiencing? So it's a weird one to sort of digest. So I doubled and tripled my efforts, and most of my out-of-body experiences, I think for the first 30 journeys out of body, were very much the same, and I built up a routine. I'd start off in my lounge with the exploration, so my body, I'd go to the lounge, I'd be in my reclining chair or on my sofa, I'd induce the experience, I'd come out of body, I'd quickly double-check my body was okay. It was just a ritual I came up with. And then I'd walk through a solid wall, which was not so solid from my new perspective, and I'd be out in my garden. And I remember in the very early days, because I was heavily conspiracy orientated at the time, I remember getting outside and looking up at the moon and thinking, ooh, the moon. Did we actually go to the moon? And suddenly I sort of just leapt up into the air like Superman, with the whole intent was to get to the moon and check for myself. And everything went wrong within the first few seconds, and I was back in my body. But at least, the idea was planted that that's possibly an opportunity that I can explore. So the first 30 journeys went about like that. I'd go and visit earthbound locations. And it wasn't exactly earthbound. This is now in non-physical reality. I'm out of body. I'm using an energy body. I'm using my astral body, whatever you want to call it. And Theosophical Society would have different labels, such as etheric body or astral body or mental body. Ultimately, these are labels for states of consciousness. And we can sometimes drop the labels once we start to realize that reality is far more interesting than just the labels that we attribute to it. So on some occasions, I'd go and visit my mother, who still lives in the U.S. in Virginia. I'd maybe try to map out some things that were going on in her house that were changes, and then I'd report back to her because she was into this stuff. Or I had a friend who would usually put up a target for me, like in remote viewing on his mantelpiece, and I'd go and visit his house, and then I'd report back to him the next day what I had, the impressions I had about the target. So it went on like this for about 30 experiences, and then something really bizarre happened that pretty much changed my whole impression of reality forever, beyond what it was already starting to change. So I went down into my lounge to do my typical routine, got out of body within probably about an hour of practice, and I stood up away from my body, and I turned around to look at my body. My body wasn't there. And I was like, fuck! Who took my body? I mean, I literally thought it was like the invasion of the body snatchers. It was gone, and I couldn't have been out of body more than a second. So I was really quite upset. And then this energy sort of just washed over me that said, it's okay, your body's absolutely fine. I was like, who the hell's that? And so there was this voice in my head now, which was as real as your voice to me in this room, your laughter. And it said to me, you're no longer near the earth plane. You're no longer in your house. And I was like, I beg to differ, and I was looking around and I could see my house, and it said, no, you shot straight into a construction of a dream. And this is your impression of who you are. It's your expectation of what you now have come to expect once you come out of body. But ultimately, you overshot the near earth plane on that last exit, and you're now, on sort of an in-between state. And this isn't the near earth plane. And I was like, okay. And I said, well, what do I do now? And it said, well, drop the vision, drop the reality of your house. And I was like, okay. And so I just thought about it dissolving, and literally the idea of the house dissolved around me. And there was a green field replaced, and it wasn't my garden. And there was a man who started walking towards me who was not a physical human from my perspective, but he was still human nonetheless, but from his perspective, in what we call the afterlife or the interlife state. And I literally overshot the earth plane by so much, I was in what you would consider the astral planes. And he mentored me on that morning, and he showed me a little bit around of areas that he could. And it really opened my eyes. It started to make me think, my spiritual home is here somewhere, surely. Because, as he was explaining, human amnesia, this great, sort of veil that comes over us while we're here in physical reality, it makes us forget. And there's usually good reasons for that. Whether you look at it as a spiritual lesson, or whether you just realize that, hey, if I've lived, thousands of lives through reincarnation, I probably have 1,000 wives and ex-wives and maybe 4,000 children or so. I mean, do I really want to have all the memory of all those people, all the intimate interactions with people? So there's probably different reasons for why we do have that forgetting process. It could also be a design of the system itself for other purposes, which we might talk about tonight with regards to the conspiracy side of this. And so after showing me around for a while, and he sort of helped me navigate back to my physical body, and like I said, everything sort of changed from that point. Even things like with conspiracy, it didn't seem a strong pull like it used to anymore, because suddenly I was experiencing, reality beyond what we have been conditioned to believe we are. Being this physical body and the ego, for example. And when I'm talking about the ego right now, I'm not talking about what we refer to in psychology as your personality. I'm talking about what we refer to in spiritual circles as the false self. That part of us that literally has cut itself off from the reality of who and what we really are, which is not a series of fears that stop us from living life in a very empowered way. So I came back to physical reality, and I decided, I want to start exploring more and more, deeper and deeper. And my experiences from that point changed. The depth came. I started having more experiences on what I would label and other people would label the astral planes, which are ultimately just the realities we experience before we come here. Because this physical material reality is a very dense reality. Our energy body, which is that energy field that surrounds the physical body, there's two components to it. It's an energy field as well as an energy grid. In the energy grid, we call it things like the meridian points. We have chakras. We have the primary chakras that are in the central channel that we're all aware of. We have major chakras in the palms of the hands and the base of the feet. We have minor chakras in the tips of fingers and toes and other joint points. And it's understanding these energy mechanics that really helped me take my practice even deeper. Because once I realized that I had sorry, you back here won't see this very easily, but we have like our physical bodies, and then we have an energy body, and then we have other aspects to our being that go beyond that. So I'm just sort of writing a series of stick people in a line. That's nothing more than that. And once I realized that I had a physical body, and I had an energy field, which we call the energy body, which is an interface point, literally between the physical body and all that we are beyond that. Who and what we are, in this literally continuum of consciousness. And then I realized through several journeys that I had other vehicles, that my soul, my monad, oversoul, whatever you want to call it, higher self, in the sort of process of coming to this reality for the first time, as being this soul, pure consciousness, whatever you want to call it, had to develop literally vehicles to access this virtual reality system, which is more than just the physical universe. The physical universe has a counterpart universe, a parallel version, which is literally an exact duplicate. And that's what we call the near-earth field, or the near-earth plane. If I was to get out of body, that's the reality I would first encounter if I came out of my body, in that vibrational state of consciousness. And I would experience a near enough duplicate of physical reality in real time. So if I get up and my partner is already up and she's reading a book, and that's what she's actually doing for real, I can experience that in real time. And that can be very interesting for gathering data and information. So that's the first sort of non-physical field. And I've learned very quickly that you can bump into people who are sleeping. They don't realize that they're sleeping. And so literally, this first dimension outside the physical one is literally where dreams take place. In the sense that we have our physical body and we have our energy body. To scientists, they would suggest that dreams are a series of chemical reactions that take place in the brain, and that consciousness is an epiphenomena of the brain. And I feel it's exactly the opposite. I feel that the brain is literally an artifact of consciousness, and therefore dreams are something more than local to the brain only. I think the brain is a great receiver, and can be tuned to receive any information, but that depends on the level of fear that we have, and the beliefs that hold us back from experiencing more than what we currently are. So, understanding that I had an energy body helped out a lot, because sometimes when my consciousness shifted into my energy body, and I tried to have an out-of-body experience, I didn't go very far. And I realized that this was something interesting that also Robert Monroe had take place within about his first 3 months of out-of-body exploration. He'd come out of his body. He didn't know what was happening. At first he thought he was dying, then he thought he had a brain tumor or something else was going on, and then he came to terms with it, that it seemed real, and that he was safe and he wasn't going to die. But every time he tried to travel more than 15 feet or so away from the body, he either snapped back into his body, or it just seemed like he was walking through mud, and he couldn't go very far. And that is because we were both trying to access the energy body as a vehicle for exploration, when ultimately it's a very dense vehicle like the physical body, but it's not designed to go on walkabouts. It's literally the interface point between physical reality and all that there is. If we wanted to have an out-of-body journey, we're literally using a projected duplicate of that, again, like the Theosophical Society would label the astral body. And that's what we would then sort of shift our awareness into, and we would be able to explore the near-earth plane as well as other planes of less dense, more subtle environments. So I started to explore accordingly. And one of the things that I found very quickly was that there were other people who lived in these environments. And especially the near-earth field. We have this application we call ghosts, paranormal activity. And before I started having out-of-body experiences, I was very interested in the paranormal, but I had no idea what the extent of it was. I didn't know what the territory and the terrain looked like from their perspective, but I knew they were obviously humans. We call them a ghost, but they're something that's basically trapped within an energy field, in the earth plane. But, that's the extent of my knowledge on it. I would sort of study clairvoyance and everything, and I'd sort of get certain information. I'd do my remote viewing, and that got me certain information. But it always left me wondering, is there something more I can gather here? And is there another tool? So the out-of-body exploration stuff seemed to fit that bill. And I remember on one particular experience, this was probably about a year into my explorations. I was in my lounge, and I was in my reclining chair in particular. I had my eye mask on. It was probably 4 or 5 in the morning. And the vibrations came, and I knew it was time, and I sat forward away from my body, went right through the eye mask, and could suddenly see into the non-physical version of my room, and there were 3 people sat at my feet. And it freaked the Jesus out of me, because up until that time, I never had any other humans in my house, in that sense. And it really freaked me out. It startled me back into my body. And I now was behind the eye mask again. I couldn't see. I could feel the paralysis was very strong, and I was really freaking out. And I was thinking, I may be back in my body, but they're still there. And they're looking at me. And I felt really super vulnerable. And so, who's experienced waking sleep paralysis? It's a frightening thing if you've never experienced it, but you can see evidence. There's a lot of other people who've experienced it. You basically wake up, faster in a sense than your body does. You consciously wake up faster than the body. And you're left in a state of absolute paralysis. You can't move even if you wanted to. And some of those, we call it catalepsy as well, sorry. As a less frightening word, it's the same thing. And when I was there and I knew those humans were there, I was like really freaking out, but I couldn't move. And I was married at the time, and I remember trying to shout out, because there's only two things you have control of in that state, and that's your eye movement and your respiratory system, so your breathing. And I was there trying to shout. I was like, yelling at the top of my lungs, but this was all that was coming out. It wasn't enough to alert anyone. And then suddenly the vibrations came back really strong, and I was like, no, because I knew, certain times you can just go with the flow. I tried to shut it down, but literally I was back out of my body, sitting up. The three humans were there. A fourth one walked through the bay window of my house and also started looking at me. It was like, and again, I found myself back in my body through fear. And it was, again, after trying to wake myself or get somebody else to come and shake me, it was impossible, and the vibrations came back a third time. I sat back up out of my body, and a fifth person walked through the partition wall between the kitchen and the lounge. And I really was like having an energetic heart attack. I was like, get me out of here. I finally broke the paralysis. I didn't have to deal with them, and I didn't want to deal with them. I didn't know who they were, what they wanted. And I got back in my body, and I was sort of rushing around the house, just thinking, they're following me. I bet you they're following me. No matter where I go, they're looking at me. And I thought, I need to calm down. So I went upstairs to take a hot shower, and I closed the curtain. I thought, why even close the curtain? They're non-physical. They can probably see right through the curtain. Or the curtain doesn't even exist, and they're having a shower with me. So I was like, I lost all sense of privacy on that night. Thank you, multidimensional reality. And over the next week, I was very sort of fearful about going out of body again, because I didn't know who they were. I didn't know what they wanted. I just didn't have enough sort of experience under my belt to how to deal with this situation. I've read things about, people who are trapped in between these layers. Some of them know they're dead. Some of them don't know they're dead. We'll get to the ones who don't know they're dead, because it's a sort of a sad story for some of them. And I didn't know who they were and what they wanted. So I stayed in my body for a period of a week, and then things started happening around the house, what we call poltergeist experiences. I suddenly would walk into a room, something would suddenly move across the table, and at the corner of my eye was like, my imagination. And then it would happen again, and maybe after about 10 times, I couldn't put it down to imagination anymore. And I was working downstairs in my office, which had a sliding door off to the lounge, and my 8-year-old son at the time, who had also taught how to have out-of-body experiences because he showed real promise with clairvoyance at that age, he walked in from the garden, and he sort of just stopped dead in his tracks, like he'd seen a ghost. And then after a couple of seconds, he wandered off. And he went upstairs, and then he came back down after a minute or so. He was like, Dad, I'm a bit freaked out. I was like, what's going on, son? He was like, there are 2 people upstairs, and when I came in from the garden, there were 2 people standing behind you, but they're dead. And I was like, yeah, I think I know who they are. I didn't know who they are, but I said, I'm aware of them. And I talked about it with him for a while, and I thought to myself, shit, this is starting to affect us physically. And I don't want my son to be traumatized, so I'm going to have to deal with this. So over the next few days, I sort of got myself in the right state, and I got in, woke up about 4 o'clock in the morning on the night I was going to do it, and I decided to confront them. And the vibrations came, I got out of the body, I stood up away from my chair ready for a fight, or whatever. Weird stuff goes through your head. And there was nobody there. And there was like a big sigh of energy body relief. And I started walking towards the bay window, and this man literally stepped out of the shadows. He was like, hello. I was like, fuck! Literally, I jumped. And I was like, don't do that. I was like, who are you? And he goes, well, and he told me who he was. He said, look, I think I'm dead. I used to live, a couple miles down the road, and he was telling me all about, the local area. So I was like, okay, I think, yes, he probably did die. And he does seem dead, because you can sort of, in a sense, feel energetically into people. You can tune into them through like telepathy, if you want to call it that, which seems to be the communication naturally beyond this belief system of physical reality, or at least the belief systems that were taught from birth. So he's telling me about his life, and that he lived up in a village just a few miles away. And I said, well, how did you get here in my house? And he's like, it was an interesting one. I said, for the past few months, I was just near where I died. And then suddenly this bus stopped, and I got this real strong sense. And he was talking about what we sometimes get while out of body, that tugs on our energy fields. And it's related to synchronicity. It's related to guidance. And he said, I got this very strong sense to get on the bus. And I was like, okay, the ghost got on the bus. He didn't need to get on the bus to arrive here, but he got on the bus. And you might think, well, did he not fall through the bus? Reality is really interesting in the sense that everything has a non-physical aspect to it. Everything has an energy field. So even this table, these boxes, these pens, everything has a non-physical signature. Everything has an underlying energy to it, just like our physical bodies do. Everything must manifest initially in these non-physical zones before it manifests here into physical reality. So, understanding this very simple, ideas about reality, I could understand his situation. I knew he didn't need to get on the bus, but he felt that Todd and the bus arrived, and it was perfectly synchronized for him, and I'm sure he was getting guidance without realizing it. Because think about us on this level of reality. Think about how we believe in things like guides, guardian angels, etc., but how many of us do we actually experience it firsthand, transparently enough to where we can pretty much have a synchronized conversation in our minds telepathically with a guide? It's not rare. It happens to all of us in a lifetime, but how often, on a regular basis, unless we practice this kind of thing? So I can imagine this next energy field, which is very dense as well. It's a very dense energy field. Not as dense as physical reality, but very dense nonetheless. If some of us on this level aren't able to, perfectly receive guidance from our guides or guardians or whatever, or people looking after us because of our fears, our belief systems, lack of practice in these sort of areas of clairvoyance and other senses, how many people do you know in your life who don't even believe in this stuff? It doesn't mean they don't have guidance. It just means they have barriers that stop them receiving or seeing the guidance. Just because somebody's died doesn't mean their ego is gone. That fear mind, that bit that says this is who I am, that self sort of belief of who they are. Not initially. We're talking about higher levels where that sort of personality can still exist on the astral planes in the interlife state, which we'll get to. So he said, yeah, so I got on the bus, and then suddenly I got another sort of indication that I should get off. And I was like, okay. And he got off, and he said, I was in your neck of the woods. And he said, I wandered around for like a day or so, and then suddenly I was wandering past your house, didn't know it was your house, and then again I got one of those indications that I should go in, and I was like, oh, charming, great, thanks, universe. And he said, I walked through, and you were literally in that chair, and you were like moving around very fast. And I wonder if he was actually watching me while I was inducing an out-of-body experience and exciting my energy body to have the experience. Because when you start putting pressure on the energy body through your thoughts, through your intention, using the techniques, it literally stimulates the flow of energy in the energy body, which opens the chakras, floods energy in, such as energy called prana, chi, universal energy, whatever we want to call it, and it would create that sort of sense of movement. And I can imagine him witnessing that. And he said, yeah, you then stood up, and I'm sure I saw two of you. And I was like, yeah, he's probably now describing my energy field, which has an energy body, which is a signature of the physical body. So he probably saw my energy body, which was now taking a duplicate shape of the physical. And he now saw the projected duplicate, which we call the astral body. And he said, you were like lightning, you were gone. And I was like, that perfectly describes an out-of-body experience. And so I said, well, why did you think you could help? I could help. He goes, well, I saw you do stuff like that, and I just thought, 2 and 2, maybe you could. So I brought some friends. And I was like, and it was like Hollywood film. It really was, but yet it was in my house. And up until that time, I read a lot of information on retrievals, helping people move, from being stuck on certain levels into the astral planes proper. And I'd done some failed retrievals up until that time. But I was really quite confident that maybe I could assist them. And the experience was really stabilized. I was properly out of body. There was no danger, it seemed, of ending the experience too soon. And just through talking with them and communicating with them, putting ideas in their heads about loved ones who went before them, who died before them. And I said, do you ever open yourself to that information? Because it's there. There are always people ready to guide you, but you have to be open to seeing it. Because sometimes we get stuck in our emotions, which, again, that first energy field outside of physical reality, it's dreamland for a lot of us. We fall asleep at night, and then a very interesting thing happens. Let's say this is the physical body, and this pink pen is our energy bodies. They're not separated by space. They're only separated by vibration. So the energy body, in a sense, perfectly overlays the physical body. on sleep, the moment, all of us, and this is for all of us, the moment we fall asleep, the energy body sort of has its own recharge, and it literally is entering its more natural state by coming out of alignment with the physical body. And the energy body will literally go into recharge mode, like it's a helium balloon floating above the physical body. But it's not designed to float off to the astral. That's not its purpose. Again, it's a conduit between the physical body and all that we are. So, typically what happens in that state, when we go into deep sleep, delta sleep, this is where we then have we produce an energetic duplicate, which we call the astral body. And that astral body can literally float off into other more subtle environments. It can be navigating on autopilot back to its spiritual home. Because you think about any reoccurring dream you've probably had in a lifetime. This is probably a memory of your home on the astral, which you have and exists still to this day and will exist between each lifetime, because you were somebody before you came here. You were somebody from another lifetime before you were this personality, and you had to have an in-between state after death. And most of us do have these homes on the astral, and they're not just one location. So the astral body is almost like on autopilot. It will find its spiritual homes, and it will recharge in its own way. You might sometimes wake up in the morning after having an experience where you were being taught something in the middle of the night. And then you wake up with some powerful energy of inspiration to learn something like Reiki, because you were probably, while in an astral state, being taught something on another level of reality, and you were probably even conscious to it at the time. You only fell unconscious to it again as you started coming back towards, literally the energy field of this dense environment. And you started to literally fall back into the energy of who you think you are. All the belief systems that come with it. We're in that more subtle body. The amnesia can drop away, especially if the astral body literally can drift into these other zones naturally because of that autopilot. It knows who it is. This is who we are. This is only a part of who we are, this human journey. So anyhow, just by talking with them, I was able to assist all of them to move vibrationally to other levels of reality, to what we would call the astral plane proper, which, again, is just a label. I'm not here to upset you with labels. It's the afterlife. We call it the interlife state, depending on the researcher and the label they give it. But it's more of our spiritual home, our spiritual reality. And this physical reality it's another thing altogether. But ultimately, I think a lot of people, because of the forgetting process between lifetimes, because of the human amnesia, a lot of people would be absolutely shocked because of their religious conditioning as to what they think exists in the afterlife. We might have these ideas that we're discarnate, sort of beings floating around in clouds, and there's angels strumming harps, or we have the opposite, and we're in brimstone and fire and burning for eternity. And these are religious ideas designed to suppress, who and what we really are, and they've been used to great effect, throughout human history to control us and take away our power, and to give our power, quite frankly, to other people. They've been used in that way for a long time, and this is one reason why I love the out-of-body state of consciousness, because it gives me an opportunity to move beyond that physical veil and to remember who and what I really am. And one thing I've really learned from this practice is with every out-of-body experience I have, where I'm able to consciously trigger the experience and consciously journey to another level, not only can I meet relatives that are deceased that I didn't get to say goodbye to, but I can now meet on a regular basis if they are not already back in the reincarnation sort of cycle. I get to say my goodbyes. I get to say my hellos again. I get to visit perhaps my spiritual homes on the astral, places I know well from other lifetimes, because this is one thing that might catch you right here. And it doesn't matter what your belief system is. I'm not here to change it in an evening. I'm not here to sort of wrestle your current belief systems away from you. I'm here literally to hopefully make you laugh, to stimulate your mind a little bit, because ultimately I find sometimes we get into, our knowns, what feels comfortable for us. And sometimes reality needs to shake us out of that a little bit so we can remember that we are a little bit more interesting than this meat suit. So, on some occasions, I visit the astral planes and I have other interesting things happen. Like, for example, I met a woman who was recently deceased from this level of reality. So, she'd been dead for about a week from here, physical Earth, and she was now in that interlife state. And that was enough time, because the time zone in these other realities is very different from the time zone in physical Earth. The rule set is very different. And that can be the case depending on what reality you're in, because you're not dealing with just one astral plane. You're dealing with subplanes. You're dealing with sort of partitioned environments which, are highly dynamic. And neighbors don't even realize that there's another environment next to them because it's a state of consciousness. And it's a state of consciousness, it's a VR reality, which you're not tuned to. And if you're not tuned to that reality, you won't even know it's there. Literally this band that circles the earth, which we call the near earth plane. There are a lot of humans in that plane which are stuck in between realities, which we call ghosts. And we typically don't physically see them. We see them with our clairvoyance. We hear them with our clairaudience. We can experience them, in that sort of way. So on this occasion, I was with this woman who was only deceased from this level for about a week. And she was telling me about her new life in the astral. She'd already had enough reacquaintance with it where other memories were being sparked, even from other lifetimes. It was almost as if, she was in just the right sort of environment for her to where the amnesia was coming fully crashing down and she was being rehabilitated back into her spiritual home proper. Because this isn't it. This is a temporary journey. And as I'm talking to her, and she's telling me about how she died and where she died in her life, and she was using verbal communication. But in those zones, you can use nonverbal communication, telepathy and such. And I was getting the backstory as she was talking. I was literally going through her personal Akashic, if you like, which is her own memories, faster than she could relay them to me, with opening her mouth. And as I was doing that, suddenly she disappeared. She literally blinked out, like she teleported away. I was like, that was kind of rude. Just having a conversation. She wasn't being rude. She literally, something happened to destabilize her energy. And I'd experienced that before, even with my own energy. And so I thought, I wonder where she went, because something tugged her energy and pulled her somewhere. And so I thought, I'm going to just lock onto her energy just by thinking of her, the woman I just met, and I'm going to surrender to wherever it takes me. And it literally brought me back from the astral field back to the near earth plane. And I was in a church. This church was probably 3 times as long as this room, 2 or 3 times as wide. And it was a congregation full of people, and there was a closed casket at the front of the room, and it was her funeral. And she was standing on the opposite side of the room when I arrived to the location. And it was very sort of what you typically expect of funerals. People were unhappy, they were sad, and they were in a state of mourning. But that really changed within minutes. She started wandering around the congregation. She would put her hand on a friend, and you could just, she was like whispering telepathically to them, I'm okay, I'm so happy in my new home, I survived death, this is cool. And she would wander around, and she was lifting the spirits of people because her energy was present. She wasn't there mourning a memory, she was being present with everyone, and it was lifting the spirits of people. And it was very powerful for me because I remember when I was 10 years old, 10 years old, my father died. And I didn't get to say goodbye to him in the way that he died. And I remember being at his funeral in America where we have open casket funerals where possible. And I remember stroking his face and wondering because of the experiences I had as a child. I always wondered if we survived death. And I was wondering if my father was there. And I didn't know. I couldn't pick up on him when I was 10 years old. And I was very sad and I was mourning him. But seeing this woman wander around, lifting the spirits of people, helping them in her own way, she was communicating with their non-physical aspect because we all have it. Even if you go to visit a loved one who is now reincarnated back into the physical reality, that personality is still within their personal Akashic field. You can still encounter that personality because this is multidimensional reality and multidimensional consciousness and multiple virtual reality systems. So when she finished, she walked over to me and she said, I'm ready to go. And we both left at the same time and wound up back where we first met. And we communicated for a little while, and then she walked off, and I came back to my body. And my next out-of-body experience, I thought to ask my guides, because I was always in a state of learning. I said, what happens with the majority of people with regards to their funeral? She said, well, if people are in a good state and they have their second death, and she was explaining, I was like, second death, what's that? She said, well, that energy field that surrounds your physical form, that's a dense vehicle. And if that's not shed on death, which is usually a very natural process, but through some sort of trauma sometimes, through whether it's emotional or physical, people sometimes don't have their second death. And because that energy body is so dense, it keeps them in that near-earth environment. When they have that second death, which they don't even usually have to think about, it literally is a natural process on death. The physical body and the energy body that sheath of energy that surrounds the physical body is shed, usually simultaneously, but depending on the state of consciousness of the person. And my guide said, for some individuals, they don't make it beyond that. They get stuck in that layer. But she said, for a majority of people who make it to these levels of reality, they are in a stable enough, sort of position to revisit their own funeral. And for most of them, it's something that, again, is a natural process, because on mourning, all that energy that's being produced by her friends and family are literally calling to her. It was no different from the guy who found his way to my house, who had been recently deceased. It's like your energy field is being tugged. And if you literally are mindful of it, just like in physical reality, we get tingling sensations. The hair stands up on the back of our neck. These are all signs that we're sort of being communicated with. And it's time to pay attention. So, these kind of experiences have really opened my eyes in a big way. And one of my friends here in physical reality is an author, which I've mentioned, William Bowman. He wrote this book, Adventures Beyond the Body. And he has this idea, which I find really interesting. He says, if we had a tool to where we could visit the afterlife before we die, to see where we would want to live, where are the cool neighborhoods, why would we not do that? And then in the next sort of paragraph, he writes, well, we have sort of an idea similar to that here on Earth that we all employ to great effect. It's the internet. How many of us nowadays, before going on holiday, use the internet as a tool to research the holiday destination? Who books their travel through the internet? Everybody does, pretty much. We research the bar, the pool, the local beaches, the nightlife, the ratings of the hotels at 4 stars, 5 stars, 3 stars. We use the internet to great effect to check up on our holiday destination. If we had a similar tool, why would we not explore the afterlife? From my perspective and my 12 years of research, direct experience, having out-of-body experiences, probably more than 800 fully conscious out-of-body experiences. And when I mean fully conscious, what I mean by that is when I'm on the astral, I know my name. I know I have a physical body on Earth. I know where I live on Earth. I can recite all of this to myself. I can spell my name forwards and backwards. I can count to whatever number I want to count. I can recall my friends, and I know where my physical body is at the time. Such as, is it in the lounge on the sofa? Am I sleeping in bed? Did I just have a spontaneous out-of-body experience? I know my identity for this personality. That's what I mean by fully conscious. And I'm there in that other system of reality, and I'm aware that this is not typically, primarily, my focus at the moment. My focus is physical Earth. But yet I know I'm in another virtual reality system. I know I'm in the afterlife, the interlife, whatever label again applies. So, in that sort of near-Earth field, you can encounter people who are literally stuck in these environments. Robert Monroe has a great experience that he talks about in his book number 3, Ultimate Journey, where he came out of his body. I think he was in New York City, and he was wandering around the city, and suddenly he got one of those tugs on his energy that zeroed him in on one apartment building, and one apartment in particular. When he got into the apartment, he said there was nothing but maybe one chair, and there was this woman who was, he read into her, she was in her 60s, and he realized that she died in her sleep. And she wasn't aware that she was dead. And she said to Monroe, "Have you come to return my furniture?" And Monroe was like, "Uh-oh, I better read more into this." And he started digging into her memories and realized that what she meant by that was the removal men came after she died. And this was the only place that she knew this was her home. And they physically started removing her furniture. And she didn't realize she was dead. And she was yelling and screaming and shouting and upset that nobody was listening to her, but she didn't realize. And so Monroe now had this information so he could better help her. And he looked at this soul chair that was actually in physical reality, but equally its energy duplicate. And he said to her, "Touch the chair." And she'd obviously already tried to encounter physical objects before and failed, especially with physical people, but she didn't know. And she hesitated, but Monroe said she finally did it. She put her hand on it, and it went right through the chair. And Monroe then said he didn't wait long. He took his hand, and he put his hand through the chair as well. And he said she instantly lit up. And she was like, "I thought it was just me," referring to dementia or whatever else. She was losing her mind. And he assured her, no, what actually happened was this. And he explained it to her, and she felt peace. And he moved her into one of these afterlife states through what we call retrieval. And it's a very profound thing to be able to assist humanity in this way. I remember when I started having these experiences, a religious friend of mine I told, he said, no, Todd, you shouldn't be doing this. You should leave the dead to the dead. And it was like, but, you know, the dead, some of them are lost. They don't know what to do. And it was like, no, you should leave them to themselves. And I thought, and he was like, you know, we're here to service, you know, be in service to each other here. And I thought, well, from my experiences, it looks like we're multidimensional, and we you know, exist on multiple levels. There's not just humanity on this level. And that wasn't his belief system, and that was absolutely fine. It didn't have to be. That's not where he was. And so I thought, you know, this isn't obviously for everybody to wake up in certain ways. You know, you wake up and you wake up. You remember when you remember, whether it's after death or before death. So the journey sort of deepens. I started having more and more experiences there. And then on one occasion, something really, I would say, extraordinary happened, but at the same time, it was exciting, but it freaked me out in a way which nothing else has. And I have to prime it first with the U.S. government's remote viewing program. And so I was very aware of that program back when it broke, the news broke back in 1996 on Nightline in the U.S. And it was a couple of years later, I think, when David Morehouse's book came out, Something Warrior, and Psychic Warrior. It's a great book. Thank you. And I got a real interest in that, and I decided to get in touch with some of the ex-military personnel. They all seem to have enormous egos, and I decided, okay, maybe not. And then I found a woman who was directly trained by one of them who didn't seem to have an enormous ego. And I was reading about her online, and I thought, she's the one. So I sent her an email, but I didn't mean to send the email. I was preparing the email. You know how we can prepare emails sometimes. It's all messy and there's disjointed, and I wasn't ready to send, so I put it into the drafts. The next morning I woke up and I had an email from her. And I was like, holy shit, she's good. But from reading straight away, I didn't put it in the draft. I sent it by mistake. And I was like, oh, that's very embarrassing because it's a real mess. But she says, deciphering your email, I kind of get the feeling that you want me to train you. And I was like, yes. And she came over for a couple of weeks and she trained me. And this was back in 1999. And I'd explored this for a few years with friends who also she trained at the same time. And it was something that definitely sparked a deeper interest in exploring non-physical reality, and it was really exciting. And she told me a lot about some of the things that she was told from some of the other military personnel that she'd learned directly from, and of course I'd read some of the books of the other ex-military folk, and it seemed like the rabbit hole was very deep indeed. They'd spent tens of millions of US dollars over the course of 20 years. They then denied that they were spending money on psychics, after a period of time because it was a waste of money and they stopped. But yet, you don't just spend 20 years and 20 million US dollars and not getting a result and continue to do it year after year. Eventually, you decide, okay, we're getting nothing from it. So it was disinformation, of course. And so this woman who trained me eventually went home and started exploring with my friends, and we got pretty good at it, and we'd sort of explore live targets like the Jill Danwin murder, anything we could get our hands on where we could sort of gather information and hopefully correlate with real-time information. And so the U.S. government, who's aware of the U.S. government remote viewing program? So we know. Okay, so that's my alarm telling me what time it is. So what time is it? 9:30? Okay. So from this point, I was well grounded in the knowledge that the U.S. Army, the CIA, all had sort of programs going on. My family is a very interesting family, very interesting background. My oldest brother is in the CIA with a top security clearance. My youngest brother is now retired from Navy intelligence, and my middle brother is retired from the Pentagon. All three with these sort of top security clearances. I am that classic black sheep, like I'm sure you are in the family. And there was no way I was going down that sort of propaganda route and brainwashing into these sort of institutions. So I have a very interesting relationship with my three brothers. The oldest one, I am pretty convinced that he is probably part of one of the CIA's remote viewing program. He's an artist by trade. He graduated from an art institute. And I wonder, how many artists does the CIA need to, do presidential emblems or criminal composites or whatever? So, and I've had conversations with him on occasion, and he seems to have an interest in these areas. He seems to have information sometimes that I don't think he should have about my life, but that could be my paranoia. But anyhow, just to give you that little bit of background. So, it's always been an interest. I've always been a conspiracy, orientated person, always a truth seeker. And then I found out, while rereading Monroe's first book for a third time, something really hit hard for me. Monroe had an experience back in 1961 when he came out of his body and he was near the presidential compound in the U.S. where they have a retreat, like Chequers here in the UK for the Prime Minister. And Monroe came out of his body and he wondered, I'll go and visit the president while I'm out of body and chat with this other part of his consciousness, and we'll talk politics. And Monroe, as he approached non-physically, out of body, this compound, he was stopped by a non-physical soldier. And he was told, point blank, you can't come in. The president's not seeing anyone. And that really stuck with me after I read that again because of the experience I'm about to relay. Because we know of the remote viewing program. We know what they're capable of doing. We've seen, probably all of us, seen some of the live demonstrations that Joseph McMoneagle have done for Japanese television, where, one in particular where they gave him targets in the greater Houston area in Texas. They chose something like 4 targets. He taught them how to choose targets. He had somebody choose the targets on the day that he was going to be filmed in front of a live studio audience. And then they basically, somebody chose a target, chose a person to be the beacon, hopped in a van with the film crew, and off they went to the target location. Opened the envelope, they got there. And Monroe's now seemingly live on live television, starting to draw and note down information about the target. And you have this sort of, 2 screens. You've got the left and the right screenshot, one of the live target with the people there, and one with the studio audience with Monroe and McMoneagle. And McMoneagle starts drawing and says, I think this is like a river or a canal. He goes, I think it's more of a canal because it's got like seawalls. It's been built up. It's been artificially, enhanced. And you're looking at a canal, a big, seawalls. And he says, there's like an overpass. And there was an overpass. And he drew the exact position of the overpass. And you see it live on TV. And you're like, God, this guy's so good. And then he's like suddenly disturbed by some noise. He's like, there's like a large mechanical sound just here, and this huge cargo ship on the live feed pulls right up next to the dock. Wow. And he's picking up all that in real time, seemingly. And then they finish off the show, and the producer comes to him and says, that was spectacular. You absolutely nailed the target. It was a world-class experience. And the producer said, what would you typically do after such a successful experience? Your team. And he said, we'd go out for a steak dinner or something like that to celebrate. And so the producer was like, well, we're taking you out for a steak dinner. And so the whole production team went out for the steak dinner, and Monroe was talking about the targets and what he did, and then suddenly the producer was like, whoa, slow down. What did you just imply? And what McMoneagle had implied was he didn't actually do the session live in front of the TV camera because he thought the day before I might be nervous. So I did the remote viewing session in my hotel room the night before. And the producer was like, wait a second, but we didn't choose the targets until today. And yes, McMoneagle was like, yes, I know. So he's like, then you just made a shambles of time and space. And he's like, yes, basically. He goes, I also remote viewed the other 3 targets just as a precaution. One was a water feature, the other was a tree house, the other one was this. And the producer's mouth was just like, Okay, so we know the power of remote viewing. We've all, probably, read stuff into it. So, if we all have a physical body, and we all have an energy body, and we all have astral bodies, and we all have a soul, and we can travel every single night out of our bodies, usually into dreamland, and we're unconscious, and we're not even really aware that we're doing it. Some of us become lucid in dreams, but we don't realize where that environment is actually taking place. They might think it's in their head. If we can all unconsciously, like a helium balloon, come out of bodies every night unconsciously, and then if there's people like me, who self-train themselves to have these experiences, who then teach thousands of other people how to do it, and a lot of those people actually do it. How many people here had an out-of-body experience, whether induced consciously or through...
Lucid dreaming the same thing?
Let's technically say yes for now. Okay, so put up your hands so everybody else can see. Put them up high. So in this room, we've got about a third of the room who has had a spontaneous or self-induced out-of-body experience. Each and every one of you are a danger to the U.S. government. You could go anywhere.
I'm not paranoid.
No, but think about this. You could go anywhere. You could visit the Pentagon. You could visit the Great Pyramids. You could go to your neighbor's house. You could go anywhere. So why wouldn't you? And why would you not be seen as a threat? Let's think back to Monroe's experience with trying to visit John F. Kennedy in 1961, and he was stopped because of a non-physical bodyguard. Now, if they have a remote viewing program, and from my perspective, the out-of-body experience is a much more powerful, interactive experience where you have a duplicate energy form and you can move between levels. Why would they not know that, and why would they not have an out-of-body exploration program? We just haven't been told. But they do. If we as individuals, I can train any of you, I could give you a few ideas tonight that can help you have out-of-body experiences within about a month of practice. If I could teach you that with no money, and you just have your time involvement with practice, but yet we know that behind the scenes for U.S. government projects, and I'm picking on the U.S. in particular because they are the big kid on the block, we know that the money that they can funnel, hundreds of millions of dollars into projects, no oversight. If they can do it, and if they have reverse engineered, non-human technology, why would they not be able to do it? Hundreds of millions of dollars, no oversight, potentially ET technology that can interdimensionally travel. Why would they not be able to have a team of out-of-body explorers that traveled with technology? We're able to induce experiences through technology. Okay, so I'm priming you for the experience I have now. So this happened probably maybe 6 years ago now. So I'm in bed. I wasn't trying to have an out-of-body experience. Suddenly I spontaneously start feeling the signpost about 4 o'clock in the morning, came out of my body, went through a wall, expecting probably to be on another level of reality, and I was in my garden. I was like, okay, I haven't been on the near-Earth plane for a couple of months. I'm going to go into London and explore, whatever. Maybe go into the London Underground, check out some tunnels, do some further research on things that I like to research for my book. And I got into London out of body, and I was walking through the city, the financial district. And there was a new building, and there was a glass wall down in the downstairs reception area, which was about the size of this wall. And it was just big glass pane with one sort of girder through the middle of it. And as I was walking past, I suddenly peripheral and sort of telepathically picked up that there was somebody there. And I looked, and there were 2 humans like me who were out of their bodies. And they were literally on the inside of the building looking out at me. And I was like, oh, hi. And I knew they were out of body. Again, by that time I could tell the difference between somebody who was a sleeper, somebody who's literally, in their astral body, and their astral body has just drifted around the earth plane, or they've just drifted as far as the astral planes and maybe they're still asleep, so we call them a sleeper. Or you encounter sometimes people who know they're awake, but they won't, and they're out of body, but they won't remember when they return. And then, of course, the odd occasion when you meet other out-of-body explorers who are fully aware that they're out of their bodies, and they would remember the experience, and you could probably even exchange mobile numbers. It can get that real. So anyhow, so these individuals knew they were out of body, and they knew who I was. So by this time, I was about maybe 4 years into my practice, maybe a little bit more, maybe 5. And they said to me in my head, we've been watching you, and we'd like you to come with us. And I was like, it didn't seem like an invitation as such, like an open invitation, a kind invitation. They come with us, we'll take you around. And I was like, it was an invitation that couldn't be refused type thing. So I gave what free will I thought I had, and I said, okay. And suddenly, energetically, we moved, literally between the near-Earth plane and a field when I got there that felt like familiar energy of the astral. But it didn't seem like, the mid-frequencies. It was sort of a low astral field, but it was still the astral. And we were literally in a facility it was warehouse proportions, Amazon warehouse, type proportions, huge. And every human being that was in that space had a physical body. Not with them, that was back on Earth somewhere. But they had a physical body. And this was the U.S. government's out-of-body exploration team.
Wow.
Again, this was new territory for me. So I'm now being shown around this facility. And as we're walking around, I'm being shown stuff. And we walked by these sort of units where there were some people sort of working, and they were out of their body just like I was. And I walked through somebody's telepathic stream, and I suddenly started picking up information, and it was information sort of from Mars, and I was like, ooh, should I be listening to that? I was trying to get out of the stream, and I was like, it's everywhere, for fuck's sake, I shouldn't be listening to this. And eventually, sort of, I was out of that little energy field of that sort of telepathic data stream, but my curiosity was already PQ'd. I was receiving, or that facility, non-physical facility, but very physically real from its perspective on the inner planes, was receiving literally telemetry, if you want to call it that, data from somebody physically on the ground on Mars. And that's the data that I was receiving. And it was just a little quick blast of information. By the end of my stay with these people, I gathered with this other sort of small group who seemed to be in charge, if you like, and they said, we've kept an eye on you. You know, I was teaching by this time, so I was high profile. And they'd obviously known that I had enough talent with this stuff that I could be a viable target for them. And they asked me, they said, would you like to join us? And I thought about my three brothers in the military and the government situations, and I thought, I'm not a flag waver. This isn't me. It never has been me. It never will be me. And I knew telepathically they already had their answer, and I was kind of like getting ready to be smited and sort of killed, and couldn't return to my physical body. And I said no to them. I said, this isn't my path, and I think you know that. And I said to them, I'm not a threat to you. You know, I don't teach a revolution. I'm not trying to overthrow, whoever you are. I said, this is a, revolution of a different kind. This is a personal exploration of, other people who are ready. They find me. I said, I'm not here for you, and I'm pretty sure you know that. And they kind of just looked at me intensely, and I was just like, oh, fuck, I'm screwed. And then one fellow finally said, okay, you can go. And I was escorted pretty much back to my physical body. And when I woke back into my body and I sat up and I started wandering around and I got on with my day, my whole thoughts were just sort of in a mess, in a jumble. I was just now thinking, okay, I know about the remote viewing program. I've done remote viewing. I know how powerful it is. I've done out-of-body exploration for about 5 years. I know what I've experienced. I know where I can go. I've gotten myself in trouble in an Area 51 type environment before, so I know what's possible. And then it hit me. Mars. And I was like, oh, fuck, yeah, Mars, what was that all about? And I was thinking, I've never visited Mars while out of my body. I've got to visit Mars now. There's something, there must be there. And all the conspiracy stuff that we've read, knowing that Joseph McMoneagle once again and Robert Monroe did a great target together once. Even Robert Monroe didn't know the target was Mars. It was somebody else from a government facility came in to test McMoneagle or the facility. And McMoneagle was there on the day, and they tested him, and he came up with this, this timeline of Martian civilization, which is in decline or now living underground, but at one point had an amazing technological civilization, more than 1 billion years ago. So, knowing that, and a couple other things that I'd sort of discovered, I thought, I want to go and I want to find out for myself. And so it took me about 10 attempts in total. An attempt actually getting out of body, making the intent to arrive, at the near Martian field, like the near Earth field, because if you don't get it right, like on that occasion where I went in too far after my, that experience where I didn't find my body the first time, if you go in a little bit too far, you're going to find maybe a duplicate reality which doesn't relate as near enough to the physical version. Or you might find a consensus reality which was literally like Christian heaven, which gets created because all thought on some level reality creates form. And you have literally entire religious environments that exist on the astral planes which people think is their afterlife, and it's not. And at some point they wake up to a bigger reality and they see a bigger light. But if your belief system is strong enough, you can get literally directed to one of these afterlife belief system territories, which is a religious type environment. So, these sort of environments can exist. And literally, there's been films about Mars. So you're sometimes contending with, in non-physical fields, Martian environments which have nothing to do with Mars whatsoever because of combined human thought that is creating form on another level of reality unconsciously. So you have to be, as an out-of-body explorer, you have to be aware of what is a real environment, as in its reality beyond people's projections, and what is a projection, like our dreams. how many of us have woken up from a dream because the brain thought it was so real, we woke up emotionally crying or laughing. Quite a few of us, because we couldn't tell the difference, because it was a virtual reality that was real to your consciousness at the time you were embedded within the dream. And when you woke up, the dream dissipates in most cases, because it takes a lot of energy to create these environments. But I promise you, and as wacky as it sounds, something like Lord of the Rings has its own environment on the astral planes, because we have so much thought energy from this level that creates form on some level. All thought creates form somewhere. And these more thought-responsive zones of the multidimensional universe, even bloody Santa Claus exists. Again, I don't need you to believe me. This is just stuff you can confirm yourself if you take the journey. And you will take the journey after death, but it's worth taking before we die. Back to my experience. Sorry, I just need some water. So,
You've got 10 minutes.
That's perfect. So it took me about 10 attempts. And I finally wound up what I thought was real Martian environment on the near Martian field, like the near Earth field, the real time zone of Mars. And at first I didn't find very much. After about 5 minutes within the experience, I thought to look up. And I looked up and I saw something that was really quite anomalous from what we've been told. The sky was a pale blue. That was the first thing that really stung me to my core. If this is the real Martian environment that I'm now, like a ghost, witnessing from that next vibrational level, and I'm witnessing Mars in real time, we've been lied to about the atmosphere in itself. I then continued and I asked, please, I didn't say please, I usually demand things. I said, take me to life on Mars. And suddenly I felt motion and I was standing next to a pool of water that had plant life growing around it. I found standing water and plant life on Mars. I then said, show me intelligent life. And again, because we're in it's called a thought-responsive environment, a thought becomes an action. And I was instantly drawn to what I was asking for. And I found U.S. military personnel on the ground on Mars. And my out-of-body experience didn't last much longer than that. I remember coming back to my body, and I was like, can I believe this? Was that real? And for 2 days afterwards, I wasn't sure whether it was real or not. I mean, it was my first experience, so you can't bank on one experience. It's not enough evidence to gather enough data to say this is proof. So at that point, I only had evidence. And then 2 days later, I was lying in my bed, and I'd just come out of a lucid dream state, and I was just drifting, and I drifted back into another dream. And within the dream, I had a low level of awareness, not enough to know I was back in a dream. There was a man walking towards me, and he was throwing something up in the air and catching it. And he kept walking towards me, and I noticed it was a desert environment, or a kind of a bleak environment. And I suddenly got, a little bit of lucidity and thought, this reminds me of Mars a few days ago. And suddenly my awareness spiked, and I went up, and this guy was almost on top of me. He was maybe about to where you are, and then he stopped. And he was throwing these 2 red dice, Las Vegas-style dice, up in the air, and catching them. And he was like, I hear through the grapevine that you've been to Mars. And I was like, this is a dream environment. You're not a dream character. And he was throwing these dice up and catching them, and then he threw them up again, and he put his hand down, and they dropped to the ground. And it's a dream environment. They're very adaptable environments, and they can be bent at will. And it literally dropped on Snake Eyes, which would have been done through his intent. And Snake Eyes, can be interpreted in several ways. One of them is death. And he said, I'm pretty sure you won't go back to Mars again, will you? And he just had this steely gaze into my eyes. And it was like, I was terrified. It was like, if you're a dream character, you're doing a good job. But he didn't feel like a dream character. We can enter people's dreams while out of body because it's a state of consciousness. I've done it to my youngest daughter when I'm doing talk tours and I'm away for such a while. I can literally enter a void state, so where there's no distractions. I can then enter her dream by feeling into what state of consciousness she's in. This is dynamic reality. This is digital reality. This is more interesting than science and religion and societies have ever told us. So anyhow, I wake up, and I literally thought, I think that guy was real. and I was wandering around my house, and then I went outside to collect the post, and there was a small little brown package, no postage stamp, no address. Opened it up, and it was red Vegas dice. I was back in my physical body. I was back in my physical body. Now, I thought about this. Again, I've experienced a lot of stuff over the course of my explorations, and I didn't doubt that if they have the technology that they showed me when I was out of my body previously at that facility, they have the money that we've talked about, they have, so they have the resources, they probably have the alien technology to go with it. They have the program. They're a lot, more tuned in than what you think. Why would they not have non-physical bodyguards at the Pentagon? Why would they not have a team of out-of-body explorers in rotation defending their interests? If we can do it, why would they not do it? The rabbit hole goes a hell of a lot deeper than maybe you even think, or maybe you've thought to this point. There's a hell of a lot more we could talk about, but I think that's literally pretty much the time that I've got. But
About 5 minutes if you have some questions.
I'd like to leave off on one thing. And can we then maybe take a few questions? Because that's one of the things I've learned from my out-of-body exploration is that everything I learn on these other levels I can apply here. And I like to apply them in a positive way. I like to apply them in a way where it helps us reclaim our power and not be so embedded within these fear paradigms anymore. Because the only thing that's going to change is when we stop spiraling downward in fear, when we start spiraling upwards in love. And a couple of years ago, so as a young adult, I hitchhiked for 3 years in the U.S. and I pretty much went everywhere. And as an adult, I always go for about 2 weeks every year in the UK for a hitchhiking journey. Whereas in the U.S., when I was younger, I always had a destination. So if I'd hold up a sign, I was traveling from Florida to San Francisco, I'd put San Francisco. That way I can cut out the local traffic. If somebody's only going 10 miles, it'll hopefully put them off, and somebody who's going a couple states, will pick me up and I'll get a long haul sort of journey. But in sort of homage, if you like, to my younger self, in honor to my younger self, I go hitchhiking here. I don't have any destination in mind. I just take my passport, I take my dice, which I now use their fucking dice on my synchronicity box. And I think to myself, I want to show people the true application of who we are on this level of reality and remind them. And so I now go on synchronicity hitchhiking trips. And so my signs will read things like the astral planes instead of Birmingham. And of course not a lot of people know what that means, but I don't want just anybody picking me up and talking football for 3 hours. I want a high quality conversation, so I don't care if it takes an hour to get a lift. So I remember the first time I do this, and I'm holding this sign, the astral planes, and I was south of London, just outside the M25, and this guy pulls over, he rolls down his window, he's like, "You trying to get to Gatwick Airport?" And I looked at it, I was like, wrong kind of planes. And the energy of him just didn't feel right. There felt something else, like one of those tugs of energy that was saying, he's not the one, don't get in this car.
There is a place at Gatwick Airport called Astral Towers. It's just around the corner from Gatwick.
Brilliant. It's nice to have that. So I waited. I was flagging on, and I waited. And this young guy pulled over in his sort of early 20s, and he picked me up, and I suddenly got the tug. I knew that was right to get in his car. I got in the car, and we're traveling for a few minutes, and then he did the socially acceptable thing by asking me what I do for a living. And I said, where do I start? I said, I teach people how to wake up in their dreams and become lucid, and then they can use it for different applications that can benefit their waking life, blah, blah, blah. And as I was explaining it to him, and you could see in his eyes, he was really getting it, and he was really, feeling it. And when I stopped talking, he was like, "Okay, so let me get this straight. So you're telling me," he goes, "Okay, for example, I'm a mechanic and I customize cars. So if I could get lucid in dreams and practice enough, I could build something like, I could have my own workshop, body shop, in a dream." I said, "Yes, if you practice enough, on occasion, that kind of thing can happen." And he said, "Okay, so I love tinkering with cars, so I could then have like a blank canvas, and then I could just wildly create, and then turn my back and turn around again, and things will change." I said, "Yeah, it can work that way if you practice enough." And then he kept driving, and then you could just see the cogs turning over in his brain. And then we got to where we were going, and I taught him a few ideas as well. And we got to where we were going, to where I was going one way and he was going the other. He literally pulled over, he turned off the car, so he turned off the ignition. And I was just about to get out, and I was like, uh-oh. I think we went very deep down the rabbit hole, and so I closed the door. And it was another minute, or it seemed, before he finally spoke. And when he did, it hit me straight away. He was like, I've worked where I work for, I think he said 2 years. And he said, never in 2 years have I asked my boss if I can go home early. And do you see where this is going to go? Straight away. It just hit me. And I was like, holy shit. And he was like, if I wouldn't have gone home early today, if I wouldn't have asked to go home early, would I have still met you? And I was like, reality is weird. I don't know. Maybe like your car's GPS system, like when you miss a turn, you're meant to go left, it'll recalculate. It'll get you back on track. So I said, maybe we would have still met. But I could feel the gravity of it. I could feel literally the huge shift in his consciousness taking place. And he then spoke up again. He was like, I would normally go home after work and I would play on Xbox and drink a few beers. And he said, maybe my friends would come around, but we've never had a conversation like this. I don't even think we know how to have a conversation like this. And he was literally a huge shift taking place. And I was like, okay, here's my card. if you need to talk, give me a call. Please feel free to call me. And it's this kind of thing where I feel, we are in service to each other on this level of reality. And we do hold spaces for each other on this level of reality. And the more we can do that in love, the better off we all are. There's a lot of things that are going to create a lot of fear in our lives. In the conspiracy circles, there's so much fear. There needs to be more love in this stuff, because the only thing that's going to make any of that stuff right is love. Fear doesn't make it right. It just adds more energy of fear to it, which makes it worse. Maybe things like anger is a motivator, a temporary starting point to motivate somebody, but anger will never finish the job. Other things like passion and kindness and love and generosity and gratitude, these are what finish the job. Because then you're being more inclusive instead of this idea that the ego gives us that we're separate beings. Its chief mechanism for creating the idea of separation is the physical body. I'm here, you're there. That's shit. But anyhow, that's my take. So thank you.
We'll allow a few minutes for questions, so go ahead.
I've got one. I've been a natural remote viewer for a long time without setting a target. I just see things and then find out they're true. And I was doing the CE5 course with Stephen Greer, and he just said, see something that's going to happen later on today. And I did that really accurately. So I'm quite good at that. I used to, for about a couple of years, every morning when I woke up, it was like I flew through the wall, and my body's like that, and I would come in over it, and I would dock like this.
That's very typical, yeah.
Yeah, and it was blissful, and I didn't want to wake up, actually. The alarm was probably going to go off in a minute,
yeah.
But eventually, so I had that. But on three occasions in my life, I've had 2 or 3 minutes of missing time in broad daylight, where it's like I've been beamed up and come down, and I don't know how I've got to where I was, but it's only like a couple of minutes. So do you know anything about the cause of that?
It's interesting. We have this phenomenon on physical Earth where sometimes people black out, sometimes for days.
Yeah.
Now, Robert Monroe had a very interesting experience back, which he reports about in his, I think it was his first book, where he had accessed a parallel version of reality and a parallel version of human Earth society, and he found a parallel version of himself. And he'd entered the body, or he overlaid his consciousness on that body, and for a few days he literally was that man. And to the point to where he started messing up the man's life. And eventually he said, okay, I got to stop this. And he withdrew his consciousness. And the man literally, on return to his body, had a complete blank as to where he'd been. His wife was just like, oh, that's a good excuse after you screw everything up. And there are literally experiences where people other aspects of your own continuum of consciousness can overlay your energy, or you can literally just have a disconnect. But reality is infinitely more interesting than I think what we realize.
I was in a restaurant or like a cafeteria, and my mate was sitting down at the table eating, And the next thing I knew, I'd arrived at his table. I hadn't paid for the food because I had the same amount of money in my back pockets when I came in the door. But somehow I got past the till and not picked up any cutlery. And I said to Steve as I arrived at his table, I said, I don't know how I got it.
Bilocation is another phenomenon that regularly occurs in remote viewing circles in particular. They talk about it regularly.
Okay.
And it's where literally you have a duplicate presence on physical Earth temporarily.
Right.
Again, if this is digital reality like Tom Campbell talks about and others, you know, a holographic universe, why could you not digitally recreate yourself somewhere else? You know, so reality is more interesting than what we think.
Yeah.
You sort of mentioned a lot about meeting fellow Americans on astral planes. Have you never met any Russians? Have you never been to Russian
I've met all
bases or
nationalities.
Japanese or?
I've literally just stayed on one particular, you know, direction tonight. But yes, of all descriptions, of all races, and when you encounter them, again, the nonverbal stuff, the telepathic stuff, it gets you past the language barrier instantly.
And did you feel similarly threatened by other nationalities as you did by?
It wasn't the nationality that I felt threatened by. It was the military personnel within that nationality.
So did you feel that with other nationalities?
I never met the personnel from their nationalities, but no, I didn't. No.
Okay.
And that was literally just one portion of American, you know, society. It was U.S. military personnel. So we need to get that straight. It wasn't all of America.
No. I'm just interested as to why, whether there's any connection between the fact that you're American and that you have, because obviously, if the Americans are doing it, the Russians must be doing it. I'm sure the Brits are doing it,
For
the
sure.
Chinese.
For sure.
But the people that you've described that you met, that sort of had this...
Again, I have
were
three
American.
brothers in you know, that sort of high echelon within the U.S. government. My oldest brother in particular has a very interesting, you know, I'm pretty sure he is within the remote viewing system. I'm sure he is, because of when my teacher was here and she was training me, she was very curious. We both did a remote viewing session and she's amazing. I've never met a psychic like her, ever. I mean, I gave her targets just off the fly out of my head. I would literally go to a corner, I'd write something down, there's no way she'd know what it was. And then within literally minutes, she knew exactly what it was, full details. And I never met anyone with such talent as her. And then when she remote viewed my brother and she started coming up with information, and then she gave me a target, which just from the target ID, which you're never supposed to preload somebody with the target information, the target ID had something in it that made me think, you know, of what target it might be. It was a complete red herring. It wound up being my brother. And I found information on him which matches him. He gets car sickness. The individual I was remote viewing got car sickness. So I think there is a link because of my family history, yes.
Right, no, that's what I was just going to say. You seem to feel that the conspiracy that affects you is to do with, say, the United States as opposed to, for example, Russia. There's a lot being said now about whether Russia is sort of trying to make the migrant situation worse.
Yeah.
And I was just interested that you concentrated mainly on...
It's my home country,
yeah.
and I've had a lot of experience with, you know, with my home country in this way, and with out-of-body stuff. And yes, I've encountered, you know, other sort of individuals from other countries while out of body, but it's just not, I've not connected with the KGB or whatever they currently have, you know, for Russian intelligence. You know, I've not connected with that while out of body. I did once connect with what I thought was a, you know, classic mobsters who wanted to engage my services. That wasn't nice, and that was in physical reality. So there are some shady characters that you can meet from every corner of the world. And yes, some of my experiences are very U.S.-centric, but most of them are astral plane-centric and have nothing to do with any country on this planet. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll go over here.
You said something about that our thoughts, people's thoughts create clusters of reality in all sorts of levels. So, in your experience, what is the structure of the rest of the reality not created by us?
Oh, so beyond
beyond
physical
form
realities,
based, yes.
beyond virtual
Beyond
realities.
that.
From my perspective, when I've hit the very highest sort of subtle level within what I call human consciousness, and this is only one human consciousness, by the way. I mean, I went to the BBC website a couple of weeks ago and didn't go there on purpose, but I did an internet search for a talk I was doing, and the BBC had this spreadsheet with a flowchart, which was very beautifully designed. And you could start off with the Drake equation. It was based on the Drake equation. Everyone knows something what that is. It's where you calculate the possibility how many communicating civilizations there are in the known universe based on, the sort of planets close within the Goldilocks zone, not too hot, not too cold, just right like Earth compared to our sun, how many stars of certain shape and size and age and heat, etc. And based on that, you can get a figure of potentially how many communicating civilizations exist in the universe. This flowchart basically let you start out with the old Drake equation, then with the updated equation based on what we now know, with the most skeptical version of that. And the most skeptical version classed it as one communicating civilization in a galaxy, so we'd be the one in the Milky Way. But in the known universe, there's over 100 billion galaxies. So you're looking at potentially, their figure came up with 78 billion communicating civilizations throughout the known universe. When you went to the more optimistic perspective within that sort of figure, it rose to 78,000 communicating civilizations within our galaxy. So we're not just dealing with one human consciousness. There are more. The human consciousness is a template, just like other, alien sort of species or non-human species. So what I've experienced when I've been out of my body, we have physical Earth, we have duplicate environments of Earth, we have environments on the astral which are physical in nature, form-based realities which apply to belief systems here on Earth. They apply to territories that don't have anything to do with Earth because it came before Earth did. It's ancient in its development in comparison to Earth in the physical universe. You're probably dealing with, just on the astral planes and those frequency bands of the humans that live on those levels in astral city environments, you're probably dealing with 80 to 90 or 100 billion humans on those levels in comparison to here. You go beyond the high astral planes into the higher planes of consciousness, where you get every religious system like the Buddhists or the Hindus, and they have their versions of what those realities are like. You start to encounter realities where there are formless environments, where a being is pure consciousness, and a being is very responsible for all of their projections. They're aware of everything that is theirs, as in projection-wise. And these are true heavenly environments, but they're temporary at best. The rabbit hole does go deeper than that. This is literally, we've been talking tonight about one system of consciousness, one series of virtual realities which have been created by a creator who was not the ultimate God that Christianity and everybody else wants us to think. Life is more interesting. One more?
I fly a lot in my so-called dreams and have a bird's eye view. So how do you travel between the astral planes?
If you haven't been before, then the best way to do this is to ask for assistance. And even if the assistance doesn't come directly, let's say, for example, you're out and you're fully aware that you're out, what I would do is I would stop. I would get into maybe a meditation posture, just purely because it's one of those ideas that can ignite certain energy. You need to raise your vibrational energy. Because some people seem to be very sort of earthbound in their explorations, and that is literally because of their vibrational energy, because the astral body that they have doesn't have the type of particles that's necessary for higher journeys. They need to literally gather more energy from other levels into those energy forms. It's like what the Theosophical Society would call our mental body. It's a level of our consciousness rarely any of us actually access consciously. Okay, so literally you have to be more conscious about this exploration. You have to set the strong intention that you're going to start building your energy for those deeper journeys, that you're going to set the intent to ask for guidance on how to reach these locations. Literally just thinking about an astral city, just thinking about it without even knowing what city, where, just thinking about an astral city which is going to give you a pleasant experience, that can be enough to set an intention to actually guide you somewhere beyond where you're used to going. You have to be open to it. Fear can't get in the way. If fear gets in the way, it can spin you into any numerous personal dreamlike environments. And you can go in and out of lucid dream and OBE type states. So it's a matter of learning to practice. And the practice comes from this level. Before you even go out of body, pretend you're out of body already. Pretend you're already asking these questions. Pretend you're already building the energy between the astral and the astral body, which is the form, the vehicle that you use for that level of exploration. And even the astral body is just an idea. All right?
And do you do any cool?
Say?
Do you do any courses?
I do courses, yes. And I didn't bring any cards, but I'm sure Andy can help you get in touch. Or you can just, I've got a great domain name called astralprojection.com. You can go there.
Todd, you mentioned a book that you were writing. Does the book exist yet?
It partially exists. But it's probably, yeah, it's because it's not, I haven't got back to it. It's quite a ways from being finished. I'm having too much fun doing talks. But I hope before the year's out.
Well, listen, I think you'll all agree that was pretty phenomenal.
Yeah.
Todd, thank you very much.
The information where unknown forces strike the edge of ecology.